Hi, thanks for joining us. Special Report Online. If this is your first time, welcome aboard. It's a different forum. Continue the conversation with the panel. We want to hear from you. You can weigh in with comments or questions. Type away. The producers are putting them in as fast as they can. Our panel, Steve, Ron, and Charles. We left with a cliffhanger about our Special Report apps and the Contenders app, and the comment was about government waste. Senator Ted Cruz was the most agreed upon comment. These guys all did it. What did you find?
Cruz.
I mean, you don't have to keep it to that.
One
now that
word.
we're online.
It was Cruz.
You can't.
I agree with it. What he said was profound. It was brilliant.
Right.
No, I mean, I think he made a good point. He sort of captured, I think, the entire problem right there. I mean, $18.6 trillion. You can't manage that if you pretend it doesn't exist.
It's more than that now. Ron,
your widget says I support Hillary Clinton. So in Brooklyn right now, heads are going poof. I think she and the Democratic Party is right that we need to raise taxes if we're going to attack this looming debt crisis. But we also have to slash entitlements. Both parties have to put on their big boy pants and solve this.
Charles, who'd you get?
I ended up in bed with Kasich. It was a shock. I think he essentially said the same thing, but in a kinder, gentler way. So it got the point across. I would agree with what Cruz said. I think I had him a few points lower than Kasich.
All right, let's talk politics since we're there. The big headline this week is Donald Trump kind of going after the process, the RNC, the fallout from Colorado. It doesn't seem to be sticking that much, but for Trump supporters, this is a rallying cry. This is the anti-establishment. These guys are screwing us. This is our guy.
Well, the facts are not with what Donald Trump is saying. I mean, what he's making an anti-factual argument. If you go back and actually look at what was reported, I was reading a Denver Post article today from August 25th, which laid out the changes in some detail. I think we can agree, or many people would agree, that the way that Colorado runs its system is not the best way to run a system. And it's why other candidates at the time, Marco Rubio for one, Jeb Bush was another, were making an argument on behalf of a primary. They argued that it would be more representative. They urged the Colorado Republican Party to do it. They didn't do it, and I think we're looking at the results. But the idea that this is some conspiracy by the establishment to now sort of retroactively hurt Trump just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Hey, here's a guy who's repeatedly looked at a very imperfect bankruptcy law system and has exploited it, stretched, bent every rule possible so he could stick it to creditors and make himself richer. And now he's saying that this party that he wants to take over, it's not fair to exploit, stretch, and play the rules as much as possible. So you're right, it's not a factual argument. But your point's exactly right. Politically, there's a lot of people in this country across the political spectrum, especially in his base right now, both in the Democratic and Republican Party, who think that all of the systems are rigged, all of their institutions are rigged against them, and this is just another one, the Republican Party. So it's going to play well for him, I think.
Yeah. You look at the delegate math, and a number of different sites are doing this, like looking at the realism, even the most optimistic projections of the remaining states. 538 blog has a good one that I looked at just before I came out here. They all are down at about 1,159, 1,100 something, short of 1,237.
Well, that's going to be really delicate. I mean, if you come within 100, then there'll be some people who say, look, close enough, it's an imperfect system, you know, it's a 2-foot putt, because you told me that a 3-foot putt's actually pretty hard.
Not a gimme.
Well, it depends. If you're Ernie Els,
yeah.
I mean, a 2-foot putt, forget it.
To my point.
Yes, that's true. So, look, there are no rules here. We haven't seen anything like this. I guess 1976 was a bit like it, but we haven't really seen a multi-ballot convention in our lifetimes. And the rules are going to be made up as you go along. I suspect, just sort of psychologically, within 100, he'll get it, but if he doesn't get it on the first ballot, if he's short, and they stick to the rule, and he isn't able to peel off a few undecided or floating delegates uncommitted on the first ballot, I think that Cruz has a decided advantage in the second and subsequent ballots.
I agree. You know, the interesting thing is there literally aren't any rules. Until the Rules Committee, which hasn't even been picked yet, gathers the week before the convention. There are no rules for the convention.
Right. Each state has 2 people that they will put into the Rules Committee. So it's 100 people. And then there will be a chair of that Rules Committee. That's not likely to be one of those people. It'll probably be somebody else. Reince Priebus, maybe former RNC chairman, could be somebody else. And that's when the rules will be made, the week before the convention. So, you know, we're going to be down in the weeds, Steve, into the arcane rules of the RNC.
We will be. I mean, I think that what is sort of being overlooked here is the question of unbound delegates. I think that's the whole ball of wax. I mean, whether you come up with the 538 number of 1150 and change, every time I do it on the New York Times delegate calculator, I get between 1175 and 1200. It seems reasonably clear or likely that Donald Trump will come up short. The question is, how short will he be? Right. And the shorter he is, the more important those unbound delegates become.
Well, you look at Pennsylvania coming up after New York.
Right.
There are 54 unbound delegates in Pennsylvania. So somebody could win Pennsylvania and they get 17, but 54 of them are still unbound.
54 on top of the 17.
On top of the 17 are unbound going to the convention. So, you know, they could go to Trump.
They could. And you know, in most cases, unbound delegates probably will go with more traditional Republican candidates. But in Pennsylvania, there's been some very good reporting done by Selena Zito and a colleague of hers at the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, where they've reached out to these delegates, or people who are running to become delegates, and asked them, how will you vote if you're an unbound delegate? And I think it was roughly 3 out of 4 in that ballpark said, in effect, I will do I will vote the way my district votes. Well, if that's the case, and if Trump has a great night and he gets 48% or
and he's
53%,
polling very well,
you could have a situation where well over half of those unbound delegates go to Trump, and they wouldn't be counted in the kinds of calculations that we're doing now, where we're really talking about bound delegates. So if Trump gets to 1158, but we're not really counting unbound delegates, that gives him a bump.
And what Trump forgot was his goal wasn't to win a whole bunch of elections. His goal was to take over the Republican Party and win the presidency. Well, if you're going to take over the Republican Party, you better know the rules, and you better get to know the people who control the rules and change the rules to your advantage.
Well,
That's what he needs
now
to do.
A couple of people. He's hired this Paul Manafort, who's running his delegate operation. He's now hired Rick Wiley, who used to be with Governor Scott Walker's operation, has a long history. Thought is he's staffing up now.
Yeah, and the question is it too late, and does he understand that just whining about a broken system isn't going to do anything more than solidify his base, that he has to beat the system. He has to change the system.
Robert K.A. says about your Kasich comment, I bet Krauthammer wrote a column about Kasich in the 90s, and Kasich blew it off. Krauthammer's extremely biased against him.
Oh,
What?
yes. I carry my grudges for decades. I mean, I'm kindergarten teachers.
Really?
I just don't forget. I don't forget.
That's tongue-in-cheek.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't know Charles speak.
Yeah, you need to put on the screen irony alert when I do that. Things that people don't get confused.
Do you think that this battle is going to tear this party apart? Can this party, the Republican Party, come back together if, well, one, it is a Trump nominee, or two, it isn't, and it splits the
I think
convention?
the answer to the question has to be, can you imagine, whatever the outcome is, and it's overwhelmingly likely to be either Cruz or Trump, I can't imagine the third candidate getting it, but let's assume it's one of those two. Can you see a scenario in which they're up on stage together, raising their hands? I can't see it. And if that doesn't happen, then you've got a split party. Look, in 1980, Ted Kennedy ran very hard against President Carter. It was a bitter campaign. The camps hated each other. And in the end, the Carter people had to go around and to beg Kennedy to go on stage. He held out until the last minute. It wasn't clear whether he would. He did go on stage. But then you had the spectacle of the President of the United States chasing Ted Kennedy around the stage, trying to get him to shake his hand. And that party, I mean, we know what happened. When you're that badly split, even if you go back to Reagan and Ford, who were not, there was no personal animosity of that sort anywhere near that. Parties get split in these kinds of races, and they often don't recover. In this one, the animosity is so deep. Cruz essentially said, after what he did to my wife, how can I support this guy? You think he's going to go up on stage, hold his hand up? And if Trump is denied the nomination, it's what we just talked about. He's going to say, he's saying it now, it'll be even more amplified, I was cheated. He won't go up and raise the hand of a guy who was fraudulently chosen. If that doesn't happen, I can't see how they win in November.
Think of how society has changed since that election. Even if Trump and Cruz held hands, the people of that institution, the people of that campaign are going to think that they were sold out. If Trump holds Cruz's hands, Trump's people are going to think, okay, he's just another politician, and they're still going to be upset, and they're going to be looking for somebody to do it the right way next election. I think what's happening is both these parties at different paces over the course of the next 3 or 4 cycles are both unraveling, and we're having a realignment because neither one of these parties are serving a majority of the public.
Yeah, I don't, to go beyond even what Charles said about imagining Cruz and Trump together, you know, if Ted Cruz wants to run, if it is Donald Trump, and if Ted Cruz wants to run in 2020, I think it would be suicidal for him among movement conservatives to grab Donald Trump's hand and say, I'm taking one for the team and embracing somebody who's, you know, I think on so many issues anti-conservative.
What about the prospect that they're going to have to come up with their number 2 heading into Cleveland? Like either a deal or just a sense that that's their person.
Well, this was what was tried, and I mean, this is what happened in 1976.
Almost to success.
Right.
Yeah.
And one would think if you're that close, you could get
I
success.
don't expect that we would see it as any kind of a requirement, but you can imagine that if you wanted to sort of invigorate the supporters of another candidate or one-time candidate or somebody who would complement you, it would make some sense. I had a senior Republican official I talked to this afternoon downplay the prospect of that. Say, no, that's not going to happen. But you can see, given that we are sort of
They don't
in
know
totally
what's
different...
gonna
Rule
happen.
anything out, exactly. We haven't seen
Do
it.
they know?
They don't.
No, I mean,
It's out of their control.
Yeah, I think because we are in such an unprecedented, you know, place here with this election, that you could imagine candidates getting creative and trying to bring on.
If you have the nominee chosen in whatever ballot, second, third, fourth ballot, then is it that the vice presidential nominee will be chosen by the convention as well, or will it be the decision of the nominee?
Any
You
senior
mean-
Republican who tells you something's not going to happen is lying to you.
You
They don't know.
mean-
That's
You mean
possible.
the nominee
You-
could turn
Yeah.
to the convention and say, "This to bring our party together, the convention should decide."
Or the convention could turn
You
to the
mean-
guy and say, we're taking it over.
You mean after the riot, after the...
No. In
the-
between the riot and the hotel room specific numbers.
knock on the doors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that's possible, but that is so far out there. I think the possibility you raised just now is quite plausible. I think the most plausible scenario is Donald Trump knows he's got, say, 1,100. He approaches Kasich. He offers him the vice presidency. This isn't old. There's nothing new or nefarious here.
Right.
Kasich has enough to put him over the top, and he wins as a ticket. It's a perfectly reasonable scenario. And if I were Trump, that's the one I would do.
Well,
Do you think
look, there's
Kasich would do
evidence. There's evidence
I
that
think
Kasich
Kasich would do
has
that.
been helping. Now, his people will tell you adamantly, under no circumstances will he do this. And Kasich, I think, made something close to a Sherman-esque statement yesterday in an interview with CBS morning show. Having said that, if you look at what happened in Michigan, where Kasich team and Trump's team teamed up to work against Cruz and deny him seats on the convention committees, it's entirely possible. And it's hard, I think, to explain what Kasich is doing in New York, going after Cruz as hard as he is, any other way than that he's at least open to that possibility.
However,
Dreamweaver, Virginia says the VP could be like an arranged marriage.
yeah, and
Those usually work.
Those work great.
yeah, but they usually end up in criminal court.
Or worse in the Middle East.
Let me give you the first 3 words of Kasich's accepting the Trump nomination. Circumstances having changed.
It's kind of like you at Canada Casino.
Well, the facts change. Quoting the great John Maynard Keynes, I will change my opinion. What do you do, sir?
Great.
Look, the casino is a place where you go, not to make friends, but to make money. And I've lost enough money at the casino that I'm going with my
All
head.
right, LG Venable says, Cruz to the U.S. Supreme Court, Kasich to VP, Trump to president, where's the big deal? Okay, you got it all figured out. Fantastic. People are engaged.
Well, that's
great.
You could come up with that kind of a deal, but that assumes that Trump would win, and he would be able to put Ted Cruz on the Supreme Court. There are reasons to be skeptical that that would actually transpire
and that
way.
a Senate would confirm him.
Yeah, I don't think we probably have to worry about the confirmation. I think it's very difficult for Donald Trump to win a presidential election, even against somebody as unlikable and with as bad favorable numbers as Hillary Clinton has.
But the fact is that any deal made by any potential nominee is contingent on them winning the White House. Because if you lose it, what you've offered is worthless. It's like stock in a startup company. It's worth could be worth nothing, or it could make you rich.
I'm just saying it's not going to help make the sale as much if people are skeptical as I think they ought to be.
Winning the general election.
Of the winning.
All right, let's turn to the Democrats quickly. This superdelegate thing is obviously pissing off some Bernie Sanders supporters pretty big.
Again, it's the rules.
Yeah.
Did Bernie Sanders get in this race to win to win 8 in a row contests and have big crowds, or did he win to take over the Democratic Party and be president? If you want to take over the Democratic Party,
Right.
Yeah,
well, then understand that you've got to give Hillary Clinton enough of a contest and bloody her up enough that the superdelegates get sherry about supporting her and they start coming to him. That's what Obama did in 2008, and there's no reason why Bernie Sanders could not have done it. It's one reason why you could argue that he shouldn't have taken the emails off the table.
Yeah. You look at the map, and he still hangs in there in a lot of these states. And while the math doesn't add up to the delegates, he's going to be close.
Yeah.
And he's going to demand something from Hillary Clinton.
Look, by many metrics, he is very competitive with her. He's down roughly 2.5 million votes, the popular vote, after there having been, 17 million roughly cast. He's not close in the superdelegates. He's reasonably close. He's within, 250
he's
on the pledged delegates?
He's further behind than Hillary was in 2008.
Yeah.
But he is closer than Cruz is to Trump.
But he's not running in the Republican primary.
No,
he's running the Democratic Party, and he's further behind than Hillary was in 2008. There is no way he can be the Democratic nominee unless he fundamentally changes the race.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Or
however, if you're talking about what's going to happen down the road, I'm not arguing that he's going to be the nominee unless there's something with the FBI. But he also he outraised her in both of the last 2 months. $45 million, I think, in each. 44.5 last month. I think 45 or 46 the month before that. He's outraising her by a sizable amount, and it's not because he's got the billionaires in his pockets. It's not. He's raking this in from grassroots Democrats who I think are frustrated with the superdelegate construct and will be frustrated, not to the same extent as the Republicans. I think the split won't be as bad.
He's approximately where Trotsky was in the runoff against Stalin.
You love that. Do you want to give the honeymoon?
I just can't help it.
Honeymoon in the Soviet Union?
I remember
he never came back? Was that the line?
Yes. That information was disclosed in a question when a Democratic... I don't remember anything about that debate except being stunned to know that this candidate for the presidency had a honeymoon. Of all the places on earth, and it was a cold part of the Soviet. It wasn't even on the Black Sea port. Sochi.
You just can't let it go.
I can't let it go.
This is so good. You can't let it go.
In fact, every time I write it in a column, I say, Bernie Sanders, who honeymooned in the
all right, since we do the hypothetical thing on the Republican side, let's just play out that the FBI does get involved. Let's say the DOJ doesn't indict her, Ron, but we hear that the FBI has moved forward with a recommendation. That comes out. It's extremely detrimental. The DOJ is pressured, but somehow gets out of the actual indictment. But it changes the dynamics in the race. Does the party, the Democratic Party establishment, turn to Bernie Sanders, or do they go to the bullpen and get Vice President Biden and say these superdelegates in their rules committee are not bound, these delegates are not bound to any candidate? Come on in, Joe.
So in this hypothetical, she has not been indicted. but there's been a recommendation from the FBI that she should be indicted.
Right.
The
And
political
it's clearly
DOJ
having an
hangs on to it.
effect.
You know, the establishment has put so much into protecting her for so long. And Bernie Sanders, two members of the establishment, right or wrong, is seen as a weak general election candidate. That I think they stick with her. I think they're stuck with her.
I think it would take an indictment. I think at that point, it's really hard to see how you carry her. But if it's your scenario, the Clintons, I mean...
But can't you make the case, let me interrupt you,
Yeah.
can't you make the case if you're a Democrat that would say, listen, we have a candidate,
Right.
even though the DOJ is not moving forward with an indictment,
It's a good
which
case.
the FBI has said she should be indicted.
It's a good
You
case.
go back to 1998 and the middle of the Lewinsky scandal. I think there was a consensus around April when he had to admit to lying that no president could carry on with the shame and the lying and all this, especially after, you know, Nixon was only a
There's
decade
people in the White House saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember David Broder, who was sort of the dean of the writers for the Washington Post, political writers, and he basically said, you know, his presidency is over. The Clintons are absolutely tenacious. They never quit. This is their entire life. This is like committing literal suicide for them. So short of an indictment, no matter what happens, if the party, I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to have to go to shenanigans to take it away from her? I think she stays and she doesn't allow herself to be driven out. The Clintons have shown that they will not be driven out of anything unless they're actually put in handcuffs.
And the Democratic Party is owned by the Clintons.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, I think the scenario that you just described is not actually that far-fetched.
That's what I mean.
It's entirely possible that the FBI recommends that the DOJ stonewalls and that she remain the Democratic nominee, even if there are damaging leaks against her. And part of the calculation will be, particularly if the Republicans nominate Donald Trump, he's beatable anyway. I think you'd see the Democratic Party saying, have you seen the polling? Have you seen his unfavorables? She could win the Democratic primary being after the FBI recommends indictment, and I think conceivably win a general election after the FBI recommends indictment, even if we know about this and know details about the recommendation, and become the next president of the United States.
Can I just say for the record,
After the FBI recommends
Pardon herself on
indicted.
Inauguration Day.
Pardon herself.
At lunch.
At lunch.
You know.
By the way, Politico's reporting that the Florida prosecutor decided not to move forward with prosecution of Corey Lewandowski in Florida in the grab.
That always
case.
seemed to me a bit of a stretch. That was assault.
The prosecution.
Yeah.
Listen, before we leave, tell me about the book.
Thank you for asking. It is one level story about what I learned about being a better father by spending a year on the road with my son, ending by meeting President Clinton and President Bush, two very gracious men who gave some time to my autistic son. On another level, it's a look at the expectations that we all have for our kids and where those expectations come from, what expectations are unique to our times, and how they shape and sometimes misshape our children.
I think it's a great read.
Thank you.
I read it quickly. But what family do you think would read this and really be benefited by it?
Mine.
Yeah.
I think I wish I had. I knew now what I knew when I was a new father what I know now. So I think it would benefit somebody who is a young man or a young woman who are just going into parenthood and realizing that, you know what, you don't have to be a perfect parent. You're not alone in feeling scared. You're not alone in feeling guilty. You're not alone in worried about how your kids are going to make it in this scary world. Do as good as you can to help your kid be as good as they can, not what you want them to be.
Well, listen, our web folks here online are book readers, and we just posted the link.
Thank you.
To Amazon. So love that boy. It's worth getting. And by the way, you have a book that's still out there, don't you?
Do you like to talk about your book?
Did you write a book?
Did you?
What the?
I saw it on.
I didn't even know.
I saw him on Red Eye.
Why did I
about
know? Why did I know that this was inevitably?
But tell us about your book.
How we would end. Yes, it's called Things That Matter, and I can tell you one thing: it has outsold The Art of the Deal.
That's news right there.
Can't tell you by how much. I'm working on that, but it has.
Say it again so you can outsell that.
No. We try to stay
Outsold
away.
Art of the Deal.
Yeah,
You're
not-
positive?
Not that I want to cast aspersions on Donald Trump, but
We're going to get the research on that. We're going to put up a graphic. All right, panel, thank you. Special report online every Wednesday. Control room, a little goodbye.